darker than blue. Or we're gonna stand around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing, they all figure. A boy's grown up shiftless jigger.
The leadership announced the silencing of Malcolm X for 90 days. He was to give no speeches and to have no contact with the press.
We were doing a lot of Kennedy stories, and there was going to be a little one talking about Malcolm having been suspended. I was expecting pick up the phone, I'd get a quote, and that would be it. In this case, he held me on the phone for longer than I had expected, and he sounded upset. He sounded worried, and it was the first time I had ever sensed vulnerability in this guy who I had always been accustomed to thinking of as an extremely strong man.
Newspapers predicted a power struggle within the Nation of Islam. It was later learned the FBI fed stories to local reporters in an attempt to deepen the rift between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm, isolated and exhausted, accepted an invitation to Miami, where young heavyweight contender Cassius Clay was training for his championship bout against Sonny Liston. Though not a member of the nation, Clay had been visiting Muslim temples for 2 years and had asked Malcolm to help him mentally prepare for the fight against Liston.
Well, going to Florida for my family was a honeymoon. My parents referred to it as a honeymoon. Of course, the significance of us going as a family was much stronger and meaningful for them. For us, it was just an opportunity to be with each other. But as my mother talked about it, as my father talked about it, it was the first time in their real life as a marital union that they had time for themselves.
Malcolm offered to bring Cassius Clay into the Nation of Islam in exchange for his own reinstatement. But the nation's hierarchy ignored Malcolm's offer. Like most of America, they saw the young boxer as a loudmouth with little chance of beating Liston.
Sonny has a big mouth below his left eye.
As Malcolm watched from ringside, the young Clay wore down the older champion. At the beginning of the 7th round, a battered Liston could not come out of his corner. Clay had become the new heavyweight champion of the world.
Now, give us that poetry on number 7. He wanted to go to heaven, so I took him in 7. You took him in 7. I am the king of the world. Hold it.
I'm pretty.
Hold it. You're not that pretty.
I'm a bad man.
Wait.
I shook up the world.
What do you think of Cassius's victory in Miami?
I think it was a great victory. He proved he was the best man.
And where were you during the fight?
I was in the auditorium watching the fight.
Right at ringside?
Right at ringside. I was in seat 7.
The nation's leadership bypassed Malcolm and called Clay directly. They accepted the young champion into the Nation of Islam and announced his new name, Muhammad Ali, at their annual convention on Savior's Day. Malcolm was not invited. In his place, introducing Elijah Muhammad, was Malcolm's former protege, the minister from Boston, Louis X.
Minister Malcolm was honest. He was sincere. He was dedicated to the uplifting of African-American people. Then you had another group of people who were officials there in Chicago who were dedicated to the uplifting of themselves. He accused them of taking money, of buying expensive jewelry, of buying furs. He accused them of converting the Nation of Islam into a criminal organization.
A lot of the well-placed people in Islam had been trained by Malcolm. Some of them had been reformed by Malcolm. They liked their little petty power positions, and there were other people in the nation with aspiration toward that #1 slot. And if Elijah Muhammad died and if Malcolm X took over the nation, the first thing he might do was some serious house cleaning. He would move the money changers out of the temple. So the idea was to get rid of him before the event of the passing of the old man.
We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
On March 8, 1964, Malcolm announced he was leaving the Nation of Islam. He formed a new religious organization called the Muslim Mosque Incorporated for those who followed him out of the nation. But Malcolm knew that a rival mosque would be seen as a direct challenge to Elijah Muhammad.
And he comes into this very room, and he sits there, and we talk to him. He says, first of all, that he had arrived early, but because he was ahead of time, he'd driven around the block a couple of times. He wanted to be exactly on time, and he was. We sat and listened. We didn't have any questions. We knew what the anguish was. We knew what was happening. And he just seemed to need a friendly ear. So we let him talk. And he talked about his time in prison. He talked about the times when he first heard of Elijah Muhammad and the change it made in his life. He expressed that deep hurt within him that his father had rejected him. And as he sat there, it was evident that if Elijah Muhammad had just done that, at that moment, whatever the differences were between them, Malcolm would have been off and running.
Malcolm was certainly a beloved son of the Harlem community, and people were interested in his side of the story. Elijah Muhammad was somebody in a picture on the wall, someone whose name was mentioned, but Harlem didn't know him. They knew Malcolm and loved Malcolm and remained loyal to Malcolm long after that split.
So what you and I have got to do is get involved. You and I have to be right there breathing down their throat. Every time they look over their shoulder, we want them to see us. We want to make them pass the strongest civil rights bill they've ever passed. Because we know even after they pass it, they can't enforce it. In order to do this, we're starting a voters registration drive. We have to get everybody in Harlem registered. Not as Democrats or Republicans, but registered as independents. If you don't have the sense of responsibility to get registered, we'll move you out of town.
Malcolm called for an aggressive plan, not only to gain political power, but to move black people towards total control of their community.
It's going to be the ballot or the bullet.
Other ethnic groups, other ethnic and racial groups come into our community and own the stores. They run the schools. They run the supermarkets. They own the movie theaters. They own the almost anything in the community that is generating income is owned by outsiders.
My personal economic philosophy is also black nationalism, which means that the black man should have a hand in controlling the economy of the so-called Negro community. He should be developing the type of knowledge that will enable him to own and operate the businesses and thereby be able to create employment for his own people, for his own kind. And the social philosophy also is black nationalism, which means that Instead of the black man trying to force himself into the society of the white man, we should be trying to eliminate from our own society the ills and the defects and make ourselves likable and sociable among our own kind.
Malcolm's whole agenda was different. He was about total independence. He was about self-determination, self-reliance, self-defense when necessary. And, of course, he was still fighting for the same thing that the others were, for justice. And so I felt Malcolm is a person I want to follow.
The growing popularity of Malcolm's new movement challenged those who remained loyal to Elijah Muhammad.
I didn't feel that I would have been a very good believer in Islam if I had just, because my own brother had left or whatever he had done, that I would leave. I wasn't that kind of a follower. Yeah. I would never have tried to coax Malcolm back. But at the same time, I would have gone on teaching because I was cleaning people up and I was making people that were indecent, decent, and I liked that.
Now at this time, Minister Filbert. Ordinarily, I would not suggest the airing of differences between brothers to outsiders, and especially over a news media. But because of the grave consequences of recent events, I submit to this medium. Because I, Filbert X, a minister of Muhammad's Mosque of Lansing, Grand Rapids, Flint, and Muskegon, Michigan, love Islam, our teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and all of his followers, I think someone should say something to speak out against the acts of my blood brother Malcolm.
The purpose of making that statement was to fortify the Muslims. So I wanted to talk to the Muslims for the point, and that's why I was brought to Chicago, to make a statement that would strengthen the Muslims. So I went forth to talk about Islam and how it is my regular teaching. But when I got ready to make my statement, John Ali put a paper in front of me and told me I should read that had been prepared for me to make.
Because I have seen and bear witness as to how Malcolm was raised from a level of nothing to a place of honor and respect throughout the world as a result of Mr. Muhammad's direction, because now I see my brother pursue a dangerous course which parallels that of the precedent set by Judas, Brutus, and Benedict Arnold and others who betray the honor and trust relationship between them and their leaders. Because I am aware of the great mental illness which besets, unfortunately, many in America, and which besetted my mother, whom I love, and many of my other brothers, and which now may have taken another victim, my brother Malcolm.
If I had read it, I wouldn't have read it over the air, you see. If I had looked at it, I wouldn't have read it over the air. And I asked John Ali about it. And he said, that's just a statement that was prepared for you to read. He said, I know the messenger will be very pleased with the way you read it. And that was it.
I talked to Malcolm about what Filbert had said, and Malcolm said he wasn't surprised. He said he knew that they were going to use everybody they could, and they could see that they could use Filbert, and they were going to do it. He said he wasn't surprised at the things that Filbert had said in the paper and all, and that he was angry that Filbert would do that, but he wasn't surprised at it.
See, in Islam, when you're considered a hypocrite, it's quite different than saying a hypocrite in Christianity or just a hypocrite who posed as a friend. In Islam, when you are accused of being a hypocrite, there are times when your life can be put on the line.
I recall getting some of those papers, and one I remember that stays in my mind is a picture that had Malcolm with horns on his head, and his head had been severed, and they were calling him a Judas. And I recall reading the language of ministers in the paper. I won't say Farrakhan. I know he was one of them, but there were other ministers too. And I recall reading that language, and I said to myself, they're trying to get him killed. They want him dead.
In April 1964, Malcolm traveled to Saudi Arabia. For some time, he had been studying Orthodox Islam. Now he arrived in Jeddah on his way to perform the Hajj, a pilgrimage required of all Muslims. Members of the Saudi royal family helped him gain entry to the holy city of Mecca.
My first impression of him was an eye-opener, because I saw a different person totally. I didn't see the fiery fire breather. I saw a very timid, almost shy man.
When a person performs a Hajj, there are certain rituals through which he has to go. All people have to dress in the same simple way. And as such, you cannot distinguish during the Hajj any people on account of their status, on account of their national origin. It is a demonstration of human brotherhood.
Because everybody was in this white garb, the rich, the poor, the powerful, the weak, the sick, everybody. And they were all intermingled. And I think that had such a profound impact on Malcolm.
Greetings from the holiest and most sacred city on earth. I often think of the warm friendliness of your wonderful family, Brother Malcolm.
Greetings from the ancient land of Arabia. Allah has blessed me to visit the holy city of Mecca, where I witnessed pilgrims of all colors, and all colors is underlined, from all parts of this earth, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood like I've never seen before. It is truly a sight to behold. El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, and I guess maybe he thought I wouldn't know who that was, so in parentheses he has Malcolm X.
Malcolm's letters to his followers made news back in America and raised the question, had he changed his position on race?
He does speak of brotherhood, the brotherhood of all races, colors, and so on in the Holy Land.
He says there were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans, but were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe could never exist between the white and the non-white.
But he has backtracked a little from the position that all white men are devils if he's saying that.
I wouldn't say that he is backtracked. One can make an adjustment in one's direction without it being backwards. When you say that he has backtracked, it seems as though that you imply you would prefer that he call white people devils and not to call them devils, that he's going in the wrong direction.
Nobody likes to be called the devil.
Oh, well, then you wouldn't consider it a backtrack if he stopped calling white people devils, then would you?
After his pilgrimage, Malcolm spent 3 weeks in Africa. On May 21st, 2 days after his 39th birthday, he returned to New York.
Malcolm, have your experiences with white-skinned Muslims in Africa and the Middle East made you feel that relations between Negroes and whites who are not Muslims is any more possible?
I didn't see any racism. I didn't see any conflict between the people over there because of the colors of their skin or the differences in color of skin.
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. Now, they had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam, perhaps it could do the same thing for him.
Malcolm, are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please. I think you're right in my chair. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations look, African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society.
As media attention increasingly focused on Malcolm, the Nation of Islam stepped up its attacks and filed eviction papers to force him from his home.
Malcolm in the spring and early summer of 1964 was in a desperate situation with the Nation of Islam, and the one weapon he had left was his knowledge of the messenger's indiscretions with various women who were working for him as secretaries. He called whether he interest him in the story. It was considered libelous, so they wouldn't do it.
When Malcolm appeared in court to challenge the eviction proceedings, he used the trial to reveal the private affairs of Elijah Muhammad.
Why are they threatening your life?
Well, primarily because they're afraid that I will tell the real reason that I'm out of the black Muslim movement, which I never told. I kept to myself. But the real reason is that Elijah Muhammad, the head of the movement, is the father of 8 children by 6 different teenage girls, 6 different teenage girls who were his private personal secretaries.
That was a serious thing, most serious thing, and to charge Elijah Muhammad with such would be really to take your own life and take your life in your own hands. You know, you would be risking your life. I'm just being plain. I'm being open and plain with you. It would really mean that somebody might kill you in the Nation of Islam.
Are you not, perhaps, afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
What do you mean?
Well, when you understand the makeup of the Muslim movement and the psychology of the Muslim movement, as long as if I myself, by having confidence in the leader of the Muslim movement, if someone came to me and I had no knowledge whatsoever of what had taken place, and they told me what I'm saying, I would kill them myself. The only thing that would prevent me from killing someone who made a statement like this, they would have to be able to let me know that it's true. Now, if anyone had come to me other than Mr. Muhammad's son, I never would have believed it, even enough to look into it. But I had been around him so closely, I had seen indications of the reality of it, but my religious sincerity made me block it out of my mind.
At the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, Malcolm announced the formation of a political group modeled after the Organization of African Unity overseas.
Assalamu alaikum.
Brother Malcolm formed the Organization of Afro-American Unity for those of us who were interested in his political, economic, and cultural programs.
Malcolm brought his new message everywhere with renewed energy. In Washington, during a hearing on civil rights, he accidentally met Martin Luther King Jr. for the only time. The two men merely exchanged greetings. In April, Malcolm delivered a major speech defining his new activism.
The ballot is as powerful as the bullet. At least they're both important. And if you don't use the ballot, you're going to have to use the bullet.
The Nation of Islam, continuing its purge of Malcolm, filed an eviction notice ordering Betty and their daughters to vacate their home. Malcolm and his family did not leave.
I think he was aware that there were people out there, you know, from his travels around, that there were people out there who wanted to work with him, but who were not prepared to become Muslims in order to do so.
One of the first things that the independent African nations did was to form an organization called the Organization of African Unity. This organization of Afro-American Unity, which has the same aim and objective
to fight whoever gets in our way. To bring about the complete independence of people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere, and first here in the United States, and bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary.
In July 1964, Malcolm was invited to join heads of state from Africa and the Middle East at the Organization of African Unity Conference in Cairo, Egypt.
Malcolm X saw no contradiction between the African fight and the Black American fight in the United States. He thought one was an extension of the other. He can draw support from one to enhance the other.
We people who are darker than blue, are we gonna stand around this town and let what others say come true? We're just good for nothing, they all figure. A boy's grown up shiftless jigger.